All right, let's do it. December 13th, 1989. Does anybody know what happened that day? December 13th, right? Yes, you do. What was it? What? No, close though. You're in the right vein. December 13th, 1989, Taylor Swift was born, okay? And I want to tell you, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about tonight. But exactly 3 months prior to that, on September 13th, 1989, Tropical Storm Hugo became a hurricane. And by September 22nd of 1989, when it made landfall, it was a Category 4 storm, which means it had winds up to 100 miles an hour, which is a lot. Okay, has anybody ever experienced a hurricane? Have any of you experienced? Okay, a couple of you have, maybe some from the regions of the coast. Yeah. So it was a Category 4 hurricane. And this hurricane, it ripped up the Carolina coast and through South Carolina, and it did a lot of damage. 50 people died as a result of that storm, and it did $10 billion worth of damage. And at the time, it was the most expensive hurricane to ever make landfall. Now, since then, it has been topped 5 other times. It's now number 6. But at the time, it was the most devastating hurricane to ever make landfall. And me personally, at that time, I lived in Charleston, and I was 6 years old, okay? So some of you guys are like, bro, 6 years old in 1989, you're like one of the ancestors. Yeah, it's whatever. This is me at 6 years old. Let's take a look at 6-year-old Brandon. Look at that guy. Guys, we're talking about a hurricane, but there's the real drip, right? Let's go. Anyway, so that's me. So again, like that was me when this happened, okay? This 1989, this big storm comes through in Charleston. We lived probably about 10 or 15 minutes away from the coast. So we didn't get like the front of the storm, but we got it. Like it's not that far, you know? And so 6-year-old me was in this house, okay? And I was scared. I was terrified. So some of you guys have said you've been through a hurricane. They're a bit scary. Have any of you been through like a really bad storm? I mean, like just crazy where you were questioning whether or not your house was going to be there, things like that? All right, so this was my situation. I'm in this house with my grandmother and my mom and my dad. And I was, like I said, I was terrified because creation was going into chaos. All of a sudden, like everything that I knew, everything that was true around me about the environment, about the weather, it was all just crazy. There was rain like I'd never seen before. There was wind like I'd never felt before. It was insane. And I remember just being so scared. But like I said, we were staying at my grandmother's house. We had pulled all the mattresses in the house to like the dining room because it was in the center of the house. And it's like, that's where you're least likely, to catch a tree to the face. And so we did that. We were in there. And I just remember this whole time being so scared. And then seeing my grandmother who had this like weird calmness. She had this weird peace. And she was singing. And she just like kept singing these songs. And she was singing these hymns. And one of them that she was singing was It Is Well, which is really funny because that is a song about a shipwreck where the author like lost his family in this shipwreck. And yet she's singing this song to bring peace into this situation, to bring peace into this chaos. And I remember just being surrounded by my parents and my grandmother in this storm and seeing this sense of peace, but I didn't have it. And then all of a sudden, it stopped. The storm was over. And I was like, oh, okay, that's not so bad. Ooh, yeah. It was a couple of hours, but it was like, okay, we can do this. And I looked at my mom and was like, it's over, right? Is that it? And she said, no. I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, it's not over. This is the eye of the storm. And so if you don't know how a hurricane works, it's a spiral-shaped storm. And literally in the middle, because the storm wraps around sort of itself, there's a calm spot in the middle of the storm. And so I remember thinking the storm was over, but it wasn't. It was kind of just really beginning because the back half was going to come, and it's sometimes worse than the front. But I remember my dad just like getting up and going outside. I'm like, what is he doing? And now some of you guys born and raised in the Midwest, like you're like, yeah, that's what we do. Like a storm's coming, we're going to go look at it, And but we didn't do that in Charleston because we only got these storms like every 30 years. They were terrifying. And so he went outside, and I remember again thinking that things were in chaos. I was like, why is my dad going outside in a hurricane? What's going to happen? He's going to get sucked up into the storm and end up with some place with like a lion and a wizard, and it's going to be weird. And like, I didn't know. I was, again, now my creation's in chaos, and now my family seems like it could be in a little bit of chaos, and I don't know what's going to happen. But my grandmother is just singing. And I'm like, what are you doing? That's weird. It's scary out there. And she's just singing. And it's because she knew in the midst of that, she knew throughout the whole process what I hope that we can walk away with tonight. She knew that Jesus is above creation. She knew that everything that was happening was within his control, was within his grasp, was within his power and his purview. She knew that he was above creation. And she knew that she could have peace in that storm. We're studying this key passage over the course of this weekend. It's from Colossians chapter 1. It'll be verses 15 through 20. But tonight, I just want to focus on 15 through 17. And here's what it says. It says, the Son, that's Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. You see, it tells us that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. And that word image is the Greek word icon, which is where we get the word icon from. It's something that represents another thing, right? But Jesus is the perfect image of this God. So if you want to know what God is like, we'll look at Jesus. We look at what he was like. We look at his character. We look at what he did, because he's the perfect image of God. And it says he's the firstborn over all creation. And that sounds kind of weird because he was born to earth at a certain time. And we're like, there were people before that. And there's people, so how is he the firstborn? Because he was there the whole time. He wasn't just born, he was incarnated. He came to earth as a baby, but he was there from the beginning. In fact, John 1 through 5 tells us that. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. And through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. And that light shines in the darkness, and darkness has not overcome it. You see, Jesus was there from the start. He created it all. He controls it all. He's above it all. And in that moment, my grandmother knew that, but I had no idea. So I was just terrified. And I think sometimes that's what happens with us. We get into the midst of chaos. We get into the midst of trouble. We get into the midst of things that we believe we can't control, and we get scared. So I want to share a story with you about some people who in that same situation. We're going to look at Matthew 14 here in a minute. I know I'm skipping around a lot. We're going to hang out here for a few. And this is the story of Jesus and his disciples. And let me set the scene for you. In the chapter before that, we find out that Jesus' cousin John has been murdered by the king. He has him beheaded, basically on a dare. It's this really bad situation. I think Jesus was grieving that pretty hard. And so he wanted to go to a place. He wanted to find a place of solitude where he could pray and grieve and be with his Father and experience his presence and just sort of let it all kind of wash over him a little bit. And so he heads to this place to try to get away from the crowd. And the crowd catches wind of it. And so they follow him. And they're like, oh, let's go talk to Jesus. Let's go be around Jesus. Let's go learn from Jesus. And scripture tells us that 5,000 men showed up. You know, adding women and children, it could have been 15,000. Who knows, right? Some scholarly estimates are around 15,000 people who show up. And none of them pack a sandwich. You're like, that's weird. That's a random thought. But like, if you're going to go to like a long thing, you know, like if you're going to sit there all day, you probably should bring some snacks. I learned this lesson very recently when my in-laws were like, hey, we're just going to pop over to this restaurant down the way and we're going to get food. It was an hour drive and an hour wait. And I had no snacks. and relationships suffered and nearly ended. But I was in California with no car, so I stuck it out. But anyway, they show up at this thing to hear Jesus speak, and then not one of them brings food. Well, that's not true. One of them brings food, okay? And so all these people start to get hungry. It starts to get late in the day, and the disciples come to Jesus, and they're like, hey, these people are hungry, and we don't have any food. What should we do? And Jesus looks at them just dead straight up in the face and goes, you should give them something to eat. And they're like, I don't know if you've been to Chick-fil-A recently, but the catering prices went up because of inflation, and feeding 15,000 people is going to cost several months' wages. And he's like, yeah, cool, take care of it. And they're like, okay. So they look around and they find this boy. He's got like 5 loaves and 2 fish. And when I say loaves, you think like the loaf of bread you bought from this. It's not that. It's like like a King's Hawaiian roll. Don't get me wrong, those things are delicious, but that's a one-man job. You know what I mean? And we're talking about 15,000 people, 5 King's Hawaiians, and 2 fish sticks, all right? And somehow, in the midst of all of it, in the midst of the fact that his cousin had just died and all he wanted to do was be alone to pray, and now all of a sudden his apostles are like, can you do something about this? He feeds 15,000 people with basically nothing, with one little boy's bag lunch. And so finally he's like, okay, I need to go be alone with my Father. So he looks at the disciples. He's like, you guys get in the boat. You go to the other side of the lake, and I'm going to meet you over there. And they say, cool. So they get in the boat. They head to the other side. And Jesus goes up on this mountain to pray. And that's where we pick up our story in verse 22. It says this, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up to the mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. So Jesus up on a mountain, his disciples are in the boat. All of a sudden, this storm kicks up, and we've got waves, we've got wind, we've got craziness happening, we've got chaos. And I told you that was in the evening, right? They got hungry in the evening, everyone sent them away. All right, so check out this next part. Shortly before dawn. All right, so we got in the boat at evening. The storm came up, and now it's shortly before dawn. So we've been in this storm for a while. It says, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. That's cool. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. Now, it's easy to judge these guys. We're like, come on, guys, you've been with Jesus. You've seen him do stuff. Like, come on. But if you were in the middle of a storm in a tiny rickety boat and you saw a person like walking to you, what would you think? I would be like, well, I guess I'm already dead because this is weird. So, but Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Okay, deal. Then I love what Peter said. Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you on the water. Okay. And Jesus says, and I quote, bet. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. I wish the story ended right there. Like, and they just like skipped across the lake and got like at another fish sandwich on the other side. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. He said, you have little faith. He said, why did you doubt? When they climbed into the boat, the wind died down, and those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret. And when it goes on to say that they were met once again by the crowds of people, and Jesus healed a bunch of them. And man, this story is so cool because to me, it sounds oddly familiar. Right? Like you guys get it? You've seen that happen before? No. Okay, got it. Cool. It sounds oddly familiar because we see Jesus walking across the water, walking over this chaos, like walking over this storm. And this is why it seems familiar, because Genesis 1:1 says this, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Remember how I told you that Jesus was there from the start? was there from the beginning. This is what we're talking about. He's hovering over the waters. And it goes on to talk about creation and God saying, let there be light, and creating all these things. But what I want us to pay attention to is the fact that the Spirit was hovering there over the water, and then Jesus is doing this same thing here in this Matthew story. You see, you have to know something about ancient literature to really kind of get this all together, right? Back then, if they wrote about water, it was about chaos. Because like now we know what a lot of the ocean looks like. We've kind of been there, or people have been there allegedly. Like, that's true, but anyway. Like we've seen it, right? Like, has anybody ever been scuba diving? I've been down pretty deep. I got stung by a jellyfish while I was down there, and I tried to tell my dad what had happened, and you can't talk when because, and I'm like, I didn't, he never, like we got out of the water like 40 minutes later. I'm like, I got stung by a jellyfish. And he's like, oh. Anyway, but back then, the waters, the deep, all that stuff, it was unexplored and it was untamed and it was considered to be very deadly. And so likely if you got caught up in a storm like this on a lake in a boat like that, that was it. It was game over. It was lights out. Thanks for playing. See you next time. Like it was it. So I want you to imagine for a second how these men felt sitting in that boat, sitting in the midst of that storm. In fact, just close your eyes for a second. Bear with me here for a second. I want to try to really paint this picture. Just imagine you're out on this lake, right? You're sitting, the water's calm. You're like going to the other side. You hear the breeze. Like Danny right now is just like, oh yeah, I'm home. And then you hear the breeze. And then all of a sudden the wind kicks up. And you're like, okay, I don't like that too much. But then all of a sudden you get these waves and the storm's coming. And these waves keep taking you up and then dropping you down and taking you up and dropping you down. And the wind is howling and you can hear it so loud and you can feel the water splashing into your face, not just from the rain, but from the waves that are splashing into the boat. You can see the water rising at your feet and you wonder if you're ever going to make it out alive. And then all of a sudden you start to hear it. You hear the wood of the boat creaking and bending and cracking and breaking. And you wonder if this is the last thing that you're ever going to see. Imagine the terror, imagine the panic, imagine the fright on these men who thought their lives were going to be over. Is the boat going to fall apart? Are we going to sink? Or what's going to happen here? And then all of a sudden you look up and just beyond what you can make out, no, that can't be. Is it? No. Maybe it is. Yeah? That's a person. Are we still scared? Yeah, we're really scared now. Okay. And then you finally start to make it out and you see this man that you've seen so many times. And he gets to you and he says, hey, it's all going to be okay. But you know what I find really, really amazing about this story? Again, it's easy for us to look at this and be like, yeah, I would have been real scared. I would have been freaking out. It's really scary. This is not the first time these men have been in this situation. And you'd think, that's weird. Right? In Mark 4, this is it, right? It's that day when evening came. It's a different day. He said, Jesus to the disciples, let's go to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, quiet, be still. Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. And he said to his disciples, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? And they were terrified and asked each other, who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. They had been in that boat before. They had been in that storm before. They had been in that situation before. And yet when it happened again, all of a sudden we're afraid. And I wonder why. I wonder why. Why'd they fear? I mean, I know why they were afraid the first time, but then when it happened again, it should have just sort of been like, yeah, we've been through this before, we've done this before. And yet they were afraid. And this is what I think is the reason, and this is why I think that it's so important for us to remember that Jesus is above creation. It is because I think, and I know from my personal life, and maybe you're with me, that every time I end up in chaos, whether it's new chaos or old chaos or repeat chaos or whatever, every time I end up in chaos, it feels brand new. It feels like it's the first time. It feels like this is the first time I've ever dealt with this situation. This is the first time hearing of it. I didn't even know this was possible. It always feels new. And here's the thing. When we're in the midst of chaos, we never rise to our ideal situation. We always fall to our foundation. Where is your foundation? Do you know? Do you know that Jesus is above it all? Do you know that he's in control of it all? Do you know that that same truth applies whether the sun is shining or the storms are raging? Do you know? Is that your foundation? Because if not, if that's your ideal, if you're like, one day I'm going to believe that, you're never, when you get into chaos, you're never going to rise to your ideal. You're always going to fall to the foundation. And if your foundation is shaky, if your foundation is on anything other than Jesus, like Peter in that moment, you risk drowning. So I want to tell you tonight, not to forget who holds it all together, because Jesus is above creation. He's not beside it. He's not part of it. He's not a cog in the wheel. He is above it all. And Jesus holds it all together. He holds it all together. So that storm that I was in, the literal one, the hurricane, the first half was so scary. The eye of the storm made it scarier. And then all of a sudden, the second half of the storm picks up. And man, there's trees falling down, there's lightning. You can hear things hitting the side of the house. It was scary. It was really scary. My grandmother, she just kept singing. And the truth is, I don't remember the end of the storm because I fell asleep. She just kept singing. And I was there with her and my family, and the storm started and it was raging, and I don't remember the end of it because I found peace and I fell asleep. And so I woke up the next day and we went outside and we looked at the damage and the destruction around us, and we thank God that it wasn't bad at our house. We lost a few things, but it wasn't a big deal. And I just remember now that I don't remember the rest of the storm. Because my focus wasn't on the storm. My focus was on the fact that my family was holding it all together for me. I don't know what storms you're facing. I don't know what you walked into here with. I don't know the issues or the challenges or the fights or the drama or your family situation or your friend situation, or if everybody's cool or if everybody's fighting. I don't know what you brought in here, but I do know who holds it all together. I don't know what you're struggling with, but I know who can put it back together. I don't know what's broken, but I know who can fix it. So tonight I want to ask you, what chaos are you facing right now? What storms are raging around you that have you convinced you're not going to make it out the other side? What is shaking your foundations and causing you to doubt? What areas do you need to give to Jesus and trust him more? Just like for me, the storm didn't actually stop. I mean, it did eventually, but it didn't stop before I fell asleep. It didn't stop before I was unaware of it. I found peace in the midst of it. I found hope in the midst of it. I'm not guaranteeing that the storm's gonna change. It might, that'd be great. But what I am telling you is if you find your hope, if you find your trust in the one that holds it all together, if you come to Jesus, if you walk with him, if you follow him, he's gonna give you peace and strength through the middle of it. He's gonna give you the strength to walk through the other side because Jesus is above creation and he holds it all together and he will hold it together for you as well. And so students, I wanna challenge you tonight like this. We've got 2 days-ish together, one day together. And it's gonna be awesome. We're gonna have a lot of fun. Now, I can't wait for tomorrow. Like, man, I'm so excited about tomorrow. But I don't want you to miss it because we didn't do the work today. And so as we continue this weekend, man, I just hope that everybody will walk out of this place confident that Jesus holds it all together. The big stuff and the small stuff, the things that matter a whole lot and the things that seem insignificant. He holds it all together. If you keep your gaze focused on him, he'll give you the peace and the strength to walk through anything. God, you're so good. You're so good. And we just thank you for who you are. We thank you that you love us. We thank you that you've called us, that you've chosen us, that you want us. God, and we thank you that you hold it all together. God, we thank you that you don't just watch from afar. It's like that story, Lord. You didn't stay up on that mountain when you saw your people in trouble. You came down, you walked right into the middle of it, and you said, do not be afraid. And so, God, whatever storms we brought in here tonight, I just thank you that you're in the midst of it with us. And I thank you that you love us enough to do that. And God, I just pray that you would make yourself clear, that you would make your peace, man, just so present. I pray that every one of us who walked in here tonight with a storm raging, even though we walk back into the same situations, God, we go with you, we go with the peace that you have and the peace that you've promised us. God, we love you. In just your name we pray. Amen.